Hello and welcome to Self Publishing Insiders with Drafts Digital. My name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and I'm the Director of Business Development. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is the logo for today. It's June 8th, 2023, and we are celebrating Women's Fiction Day. And to join me in the virtual studios today, I have Paulette Stout to help celebrate. Hey, happy Women's Fiction Day, Paulette.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, this is really awesome to get a chance to chat with you, particularly today. Now, before we get into Women's Fiction Day and some of the great stuff that's going on, let's talk a little bit about Paulette Stout. Let's talk about you as a writer, so our viewers or listeners can get to know you first.
Cool. Yeah. So I write fast paced and empowering women's fiction that tackles social issues. I feel like fiction is a really great place to explore topics as a society that we kind of shove under the carpet. So
Right.
I try to scoop those out and bring them into my books and just mush them up in a really bingeable way for people to kind of have a fun read, but also maybe think about something maybe they haven't considered before.
Okay. Cool. And you have so far, as I understand it, there's like three books coming up. You have two books out already in a particular series. Can you talk a little bit about what they are? Like, because I know there's an interesting story that goes with the first book. I remember the last time we chatted.
Yeah, for sure. So my first book is Love Only Better, and took me about like 20 almost 20 years to write this
Okay.
book. As my debut. You know how that goes. Your first book is always like, hey.
Yeah.
But this is it's a kind of a semi-autobiographical situation with the main character going through a journey where she's really trying to explore and find her intimate life, understand how her body works, and have some better bedroom experiences. So it's a little spicy for those interested.
It's a little spice.
And
So for anyone who's, I'm just popping the cover up so they can go check it out at their favorite retailer as well. So, and that's Love Only Better is available in paperback, ebook, I imagine.
yes, paper book and ebook, and the audiobook will be available later this year.
Oh, that's exciting. That is awesome. Awesome. Cool. But then you did a follow-up to that one as well,
I
right?
did. Over My Shoulder, for anyone watching on the video, is What We Never Say. And it's in the same universe, and it follows the characters first introduced in Love Only Better. But in this book, we get Rebecca, Kyle, and we have a delicious villain in this one who
Delicious villain.
delicious villain. Yeah, she's a kind of modeled a little bit out like a Anna Wintour type publisher of a high fashion magazine in New York City, and she was a secret in Kyle's past, and we learn about her in the second book.
Cool. So you said that that first book took 20 years to
Yes.
write. What was it about it? Is it that you rewrote it? Was it that you had the idea kicking around, but then you finally sat down? Like, what was it that actually got you over that finish line?
Well, I think it was a few things. First, it was, so much about me and this intimate journey I was on personally. And it's something we kind of don't talk about. We don't talk about women's intimacy. It's,
Yeah.
men's pleasure world is well known and kind of goofed around in movies a lot, but women's really isn't. It's something we kind of whisper about. So I think the topic was really something that I was like, do I want to write about this and then go to work? Do I want to write about this and go stand on the sidelines at soccer? Like
Yeah.
be the lady who writes the sexy books. So I think I was a little intimidated to be public about the issue, quite frankly. So it took a
Okay.
really long time for me to work up the courage. And I think my children becoming adults was a big impetus for me to be like, yep, just go ahead and do it.
Oh, okay. It's funny. A good friend of mine, Canadian science fiction writer Julie Trineda, had for years written biology textbooks. That was her job, but she had always wanted to write fiction. And I remember talking to her when she released her first novel, and she said having had numerous books out was not a big deal, but the first fiction book, she said, and I'll never forget this. It feels like I'm standing naked on my front lawn, and that's the exposure, right? That you kind of feel when you kind of lay things out like that.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you draw really heavily in your personal life. And that's something that I do. Like I write about things that happen in my, especially with this first book. And then as we moved into the second book, and the characters became their own, and they separated from me as Paulette Stout, the writer, and they became Kyle and Rebecca, the people in the book, and it was really freeing for me to be able just to kind of let loose on the page. So I'm
Right.
really enjoying what I'm writing, and the next book will be out February 2024, and it follows, another character from the friend group, Barbara, who is a Black professional lawyer. So I've been working a lot with sensitivity readers to get that
Right.
experience right. And she's a lawyer, and that's creating like a whole hell of a lot of nightmares for me. I'm never again gonna have lawyers in my book. Like especially two lawyers who are dating. It's like a nightmare about ethics and propriety and like yuck.
Yeah. No, next time write your book about an employee who works for Drafted Digital. Much
Yes.
easier than the legal business. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Well, actually, the next book after Barbara's book next year will be it'll tackle the issue of weight and body size.
oh, okay.
So
All right.
that'll be interesting. Barbara's book tackles race and class. So really light issues I take on.
Yeah, light issues, of course. Yeah.
Just really.
So let's talk about that. Where in the bookstores, if someone were to find this in the bookstore, what section would they find the books in, and what would be what like comp authors or other books or authors that people would have enjoyed that would really like these books?
Yeah, I think, women's fiction is usually shelved in the fiction section,
Okay.
literary fiction section, which is really interesting. So, personally, my books, comps for mine are, Colleen Hoover, Taylor Jenkins Reid, Michelle Weinstein, books kind of like that. Jodi Picoult, like in that, if you like books that maybe have some romance but also have some other deeper stuff happening that you're happy to take on, that's kind of where
Okay.
I hang.
Okay. So you had mentioned that. Okay, so women's fiction is usually shelved within the general fiction section of a store. Not science fiction, not fantasy, not mystery, not romance, not whatever, not horror, but and yet women's fiction is pretty all encompassing. It's not just a small genre. I'd love to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, especially today with women's fiction day happening. The Women's Fiction Writers Association defines women's fiction as a story where the main character takes a journey to a more fulfilled self. So they start the book one way, and then by
Okay.
the end of the book, they're just like a newer, better version of themselves. So that's kind of really open. And that's why we love to write these books. There's a lot of creative freedom that happens. And, we can have paranormal elements, we can have romantic elements, we can have mystery elements, we can have thriller elements, because the story at its core is about a personal transformation. So
Okay.
that can be shelved in lots of different places, but it usually is in the fiction section.
Okay, so you talked about the organization as well, and we showed the logo at the opening of this video. Can you talk a little bit about women's fiction writers and I guess your role in that organization?
Sure. So Women Fiction Writers Association is a group of career authors who write the genre of women's fiction. And it is a separate from other ones. It was originally created by four people. Just felt like we need a home for people who write these stories, who have these stories who are about this transformation, but also dabble in other subgenres as well. And we came from a little bit of an offshoot of RWA, Romance Writers of America. They
Okay.
kind of, there wasn't a place for us. So we needed a place. And that's
Okay.
when the organization was formed. And we're celebrating our 10th anniversary
Oh,
this
happy 10th.
year.
That's 10 at 10. Yeah, I get, yeah, because Romance Writers Association, you're like, yeah, but not all of us write romance. Yes, there may
Exactly.
be love, there may be romance in some of our novels, but it's not all romance. So an offshoot, 10 years.
Yeah, it's great. We're having a
Wow.
big conference in Chicago. So if you're interested in learning more about that, it's open, for non-members too. It's womensfictionwriters.org.
Okay.
And it's really more of a topic conference versus like a workshop, how we normally have it, our annual conferences.
And when is you said it's in Chicago in 2023. When is
Yes,
that taking
it's
place?
September, the week of September 22nd through
Okay.
24th. I think that's kind of like those days in there is when it's
Right.
happening. And it's it's really amazing that it's been around for this long, and it's a little bit of a secret, but we're growing. We're over 2,000 members now.
Wow.
We have some international members, mostly United States and Canada, I think, just because of the time zones and
Yeah.
how we have resources and workshops and support. We have a guiding scribe. We do webinars, and there's a lot of great stuff happening.
Oh, that's fantastic. So,
Despite the name, it's a great group of authors.
yeah, H.L. Brooks comments amazing, because I guess it is really important for and this is a little love symbol from Heather. So, and of course our designer Alyssa, who does a lot of the designs, is pretty typography. Of course,
I know, right?
Yeah,
Like
I know. Of
gorgeous.
course,
Yeah,
always
I'm
got an
totally,
eye.
my cover designer is amazing. Her name is Rena Violet, and she's just amazing.
That is fantastic. Now, I know there's a fun backstory to not only was the first novel that you were writing, not only was that a long process before you felt comfortable releasing that, but you also went through a few iterations, and I think some of it had to do with, does the cover speak to my target audience? If you'd be willing to share some of the backstory, and this is the third version of the cover, right, that we're talking about?
It is. I had 3 covers within the first 6 months of launching Love Only Better back in 2021, and at the time, it was my debut, and I was still kinda learning the craft of writing, and the story really straddles kind of romance and women's fiction, and I kind of wasn't sure where I sat, and at the time, the editor that I had back then was like, "Oh, lead into the romance." So I came up with, I'm a marketer. I'm really trying to get my packaging right. I'm romance. So I had a rom-com cover
Okay, all right,
originally.
yeah.
And it's a
The
super cute
cartoon
cover,
characters.
it's a super
Yeah,
cute cover. And it
yeah.
just kind of blew up on NetGalley and on Goodreads, and people started reading it and they're like, whoa, there are some more serious stuff going on with this,
Yeah.
journey of women's intimacy. And the romance readers they were just not happy. And they were having all kinds of mean girl conversations over
Oh,
on
no.
Goodreads. And I was completely devastated. Like I hadn't even reached my launch date yet, and it was
Oh,
already
no.
like this firestorm happening. So I was a
And
little
this is after being very nervous and terrified about how people will react, and suddenly you're getting, like, the worst thing happened.
yeah,
People are
completely.
reacting.
Well, Mark, it was like the worst thing ever. So I
Oh my
switched
goodness.
the cover super quick. Hey, I'm indie. I can make really quick changes. I'm like, I want everyone to know there's some kind of lady parts business going on in this book.
Okay.
So we made this cover, which I thought it'll be cheeky. It's a grapefruit, but then it was like banned on
Oh,
Facebook
because
ads.
people
Amazon
oh.
ads refused to run it. They didn't ban my book, but they refused to let me advertise. They said it was obfuscated profanity. So,
Oh my goodness. Yeah,
I,
yeah, I guess so. As a thumbnail, people might say, "Hey, you're showing off some things you're not
yeah.
supposed to be showing on a cover." Wow.
But then it was like I had to really be honest with myself. Like it wasn't working. Like the grapefruit was cute, but it looked a little nonfiction-y, trying to get that packaging right.
Right,
The
yeah.
promise was a little unclear. So that's when I met my friend, my lovely designer now, and we
Awesome.
came up with this, orchid flower
Yeah.
theme. Oh yeah, you've got it there.
I'll
Perfect.
pop up the big one on the
Pop up
screen
the big
here.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that just spoke a lot more clearly to the women's fiction reader. I firmly packaged this is a women's fiction book. It's got romance in it, but it's got some more, some more
Yeah.
serious, like kind of soulful themes. And people finish the book and they're super excited. They kind of run through the wall and they're like,
Right.
yes, like why don't we talk about this ever? So and that's
Yeah.
what I love about all my books is people finish the books and they're like, oh my God, we never talk about this. We should be talking about this. So
No, I love that too, and it took a while to get to that point because it was a very intimate, right? It was really a lot, and something that would make people uncomfortable talking about in polite company. He
yes,
says with air quotes.
yes, tea and crumpets time. Like we ain't talking about, lady parts. So
Yeah, exactly. But here's an important lesson. I want to like kind of point this out if it isn't already very clear. Is that as an indie author, you were able to adjust. You said, it's not working. Got the wrong reaction, the wrong people. That's not what they expected. Tried something else, got a completely different reaction. Got censored. Couldn't do ads because they thought it was like nudity and stuff. And then you landed on the right cover. So you can make mistakes and you can kind of work your way through them, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think pivoting, and that's hard. And to your point, when we write our stories, we put so much of ourselves into them. It can, and then we're like, I want that cover, and you get really kind of emotionally invested in the cover and what's on it, and that's a whole other story about cover design. But just from a marketing perspective, I tried to be really dispassionate about the cover. The cover is like the box of cereal. It's the packaging. And if it's not right, just pivot, just go in a different direction so that you can
Right.
get the right readers, because you're not going to get sales. You're not going to get good reviews if you're targeting the wrong people.
Yeah, for sure. And just a few comments from folks watching live. Alyssa says, "What a wild story about the cover. Thanks for sharing."
Yes, thank you. It's a
And
little embarrassing.
and H.L. Brooks also says, "Thanks for sharing the cover saga. It's important." And yes, it is. It is so hard to get it right. But I have to ask, because I know you were trepidatious about the whole thing. I'm shocked that you had the strength and the courage not to just turn tail and run away and say, "Okay, I can't do this." But you kept going. What I mean, what was it that gave you that extra, energy boost, that power that led you through that? Because that can't have been an easy time.
Yeah, it was. I had a really sobering few days back in before a few days, about before I launched my book, and I was like, "Oh my god, I have just made the worst possible mistake thinking that this was a book I should share with the world." And
Right.
then you start getting the feedback of, "Oh my god, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one, like, not finishing the bedroom and thinking I was crazy." And just having some of those comments come in just reminded me why I wrote the book in the first place. I
Yeah.
wrote the book I wish I had at the time when I was going through that, when
Yeah.
all that was out there was like super clinical medical stuff or like super kinky stuff that made you want to pink through your fingers. There wasn't anything in between. So,
Right.
I'm like, that's why I wrote the book. So I just had to kind of get re-grounded in the fact that the book isn't for everyone and no book is, and that's
Right.
okay.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Because I think here's the thing: is you were alone. You couldn't find something that wasn't fulfilling that understanding that you're not the only one who would go through something like this. And then you released a book, and I bet you've probably heard from readers that said, "Oh my God, me too." Right? "Oh my God, I
Yes.
thought." Right? So you approach it in a fictional way, so that it wasn't, sometimes with nonfiction, people put up walls and don't want to hear it, and they get like peek through the fingers and stuff like that. That is fantastic. But that kind of leads me to, when did you discover this organization? Because that's another thing that writers do not to feel alone, is, okay, there's other people who write in the genre I write in, or we share some of the same challenges. How do we get together? When did you discover them?
Well, back in 2020, I had a full-time job and I was let go. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this book thing. Because if I don't do it now, I'm never gonna do it. So I really just started digging in to resources and podcasts, and I found WFWA, and I was like, wow, this is a great organization. This is a place where I can go, where I can feel less alone when I'm typing in a room with a keyboard. I'm just like staring at the walls and I feel like I'm the only one doing that, and help me. So it's
Right.
great. And it has a super engaged community. And we have both traditionally published authors, we have hybrid published authors, we have small press, we have large press, we have indie. So it's a really welcoming organization. We have an indie group within WFWA that we have our own little Facebook group that's really active. And it's just nice to feel like you belong someplace. And that was what was a great thing for me with WFWA. And obviously, I just started digging into the podcast world. I found Joanna Penn. That's how I found you and your podcast, Mark. And you do so much great work supporting the indie community, and just it's thank you. And me personally,
Oh.
I'm very grateful.
No, well, thanks too. And the other thing too is, you reached out to Draft to Digital because you got together with a group of other writers, and this is something, I think is a really important thing for writers to understand, is retailers and distributors and all the people out there are always looking for great content, but one of the biggest challenges that we all have is curating the right content at the right time for, a day like today or other things that we want to celebrate. And it's really helpful when authors get together, and you're our main contact for this awesome group of people, and you've provided content that Megan, our author promotions coordinator, is putting together and helping us share to retailers as well as on the Smashword store. Can you talk a little bit about that process of working together and as sort of a team, and maybe being, I guess, a lot more powerful together, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, when you're an author, you feel alone as it is. So whether it's with an organization or informally with a group of friends, we reached out. I think you encouraged us, Mark, to say, hey, we always want people to come and put stuff together. So I gathered a group of authors. I think it was 12 at the time when we reached out to Megan and asked her, would you be open to doing some kind of a retailer promotion with us? And she said, for sure. We've got Smashwords now, and we let's get something together for Women's Fiction Day. And obviously this is months in advance because it takes time to partner and to make things happen. I think we reached out originally at the end of the previous year, and then more
Yeah.
kind of actively in March. We started meeting, and
Yeah.
just to kind of put the authors together and in a common genre that we don't really talk about a lot, women's fiction. So
Yeah.
giving us a little bit of a platform to promote our work was really a welcome opportunity.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about the women's fiction as well, because there may be people who don't understand women's fiction, because when we talked about it earlier, we said, well, it can include elements from so many different genres, but women's fiction as a genre itself, I'm sure you guys talk about that a lot. Is that the most appropriate term, for example, or are there other things that you guys have been discussing about women's fiction?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really active conversation at the organization right now, and it's something that we're working on because we want the name of our genre to be as inclusive as possible for multiple reasons. Obviously, we want to make sure that people feel welcome both writing and reading these stories and writing about these different themes. So the name is definitely under consideration. We've been trying to figure out what's the best name for us. So I know they're working with, they've contracted with a consultant, and we're trying to figure out like what's the best name for us. Right now, the trade is using women's fiction. Publishers Marketplace took women's fiction off because they felt like it wasn't representative. So a lot of awards that are out there, which are especially important for indies, they don't even have women's fiction categories. So,
Right.
we're really trying to advocate for the genre and for the storytelling. And as a marketer, I'm sensitive to, we really need the best name possible. So it's something that we're thinking of. But to your point earlier that you enjoyed reading women's fiction, I had one of my readers tell me that, her husband stole the book and she had to wait to get it back because he was reading it, the one I got here, so it's like, these are really engaging, great,
Yeah.
well-written stories, and everyone should be reading them. So we shouldn't be limiting ourselves with a
Yeah.
name that might just make it not palatable to half the population because they think it's not for them.
And it's kind of funny because okay, I have all the privilege in the universe. I'm a heterosexual, cisgender, middle-aged white guy. And
You're
I
a
have
great one.
all the privilege in the world. So but I don't feel excluded when I see, oh, it's women's fiction, because I actually am really partial to, I really love a good women's fiction novel. I love a good women's fiction movie story. I'm just into it because, again, I love that transformation of character. I love all those elements of it. So I don't feel threatened, and I definitely don't feel excluded. Of course, like I said, precursors, of course you don't feel excluded. You're never excluded because it's all about you, guy. but
Right.
but
But I think
so that's,
there's confusion out there with the name. And
yeah,
I
but
think that people read it now and don't even realize they're reading women's fiction. I mean, if you
yeah,
think of blockbuster like It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, I would argue that that is women's fiction
yeah,
because It does not have a happily ever after or happily for now. It does get positioned as romance, but I mean, that's
Mm.
a pretty big nugget not to hit in a
No,
title.
no,
But
it's one of the biggest ones. Like, it's like,
yeah,
sorry,
I
you
mean, if
can't.
you don't have a happily ever after, happily for now,
Yeah.
you're not a
Wow.
romance. So for me, It Ends With Us is really women's fiction. It has a compelling story about a serious theme and has character growth. The whole name of the book is wrapped up in that moment. I won't give it away for people, but come on now. They're making a movie. If you haven't read it, like, go read it. But I think that is a powerful example of women's fiction because it has
Yeah.
romantic elements, but it also has more serious themes of domestic abuse in there. And some romance
Right.
readers hit that story and they see it all over the place and they don't know that it's got domestic abuse in it, and they're like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
like, what's this going on here?"
Well,
I
I
don't.
mean, yeah, it has the elements that are appealing for some escapism and some of that, but it also is grounded in reality and real struggles that happen, not just the billionaire bad boy that I can change, or whatever the case may be. But
Oh,
there's a
and
lot
I
going
love
on.
those.
Yeah.
There's
You know,
definitely a place for them, but
yeah, and they're fun too. But there's is a different. It's different. We know it's going to have a happy ending. We know
right,
that that's going
exactly.
to.
And but get the package, like you want to make sure you're matching reader expectations, and that's all
Yeah.
the genre
Yeah.
is for. Is that readers can find a book like ones they already like. So, for instance, here's
Yeah.
another one. Lessons in Chemistry. It's all over the place. It's a super popular book. I read it. It's great. I don't think it's rom-commy satire. It's got death and mourning. It has pedophilia. It has domestic abuse. It has workplace discrimination, and it has societal discrimination.
Yeah.
It even has a
Yeah.
little bit of mild terrorism in it. So,
Yeah.
is it a rom-com? I don't think so. I
Yeah.
think it's women's fiction. So I'm claiming that one too. Look, if we were having a little board with little tickets, I'm taking the Then to That, and I'm taking Lessons in Chemistry, and I'm claiming them as women's fiction.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I'm going to pop up this question or this comment from Lexi, and Lexi says it's great that even in major media, the false belief that women-led stories is lesser, that's being debunked, and women's fiction's getting the respect it deserves. And to Lexi's point, I love the term women's fiction because I think of women's fiction with a significant amount of respect, and I don't want to lose that because I think it's well deserved. I think about trying to think about the TV show This Is Us is it's women's fiction. When you think about, like, it has all those elements. It has truthful, hard hitting, soul crushing elements. They go into all kinds of things with body image, and they go into race and class and all kinds of stuff. Obviously, lots of grief and things like that. But it's kind of like I love that show to death. My partner Liz doesn't, because she doesn't like those. Just like I probably enjoy women's fiction more than she does because I go right into it and I'm just having a good time. Whereas that's not her cup of tea at all. But I do love that respect aspect of it, and I would hate to lose that if the name ends up changing, as it probably will as publishing evolves, etc.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm with you because you women are still fighting in so many spaces in our society and societies around the world of getting what is rightfully there. So part of me feels a little nostalgic for let's make sure that there's a space for people who identify as women to claim our space, but then you also want to make sure that people know that these stories are for them. And I feel like romance has a similar issue. Romance is often thought of as a lesser genre because it's dealing with the romantic relationships, and but there's a lot of really great,
Universal.
soulful,
It's
amazing
universal.
writing happening in the romance space. And the same is true for women's fiction. But because
Yeah,
they are so targeted for women, people do think that they are lesser. And I feel
right.
like we need to make sure the stories stay, but maybe
Yes.
the label changes. you know.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too is I love romance. I love romantic comedy. I love romance. I love weepy romance. I love comedy romance. I just really enjoy that because come on, it's yes, it's traditionally something that's thought of as something that women buy and read. However, it is universal, right? It's about romance. It's about love. It's about that process, the change, the transformation, as you said, from not being with someone to being with someone,
Right. And I think
which
that
is
that's the beauty of women's fiction too, because it's really an exploration of the human condition, in all
yeah,
of its facets. And that's why, some have romance, some don't. Some have a lot of, deep exploration of interpersonal relationships and families,
yeah,
multi-generational conflict, conflict
yeah.
between spouses, conflict between workplace, career, how to balance it all, children, how to be alone and feel okay with that space, aging. It's got all these different dimensions within it that you want to make sure that everyone, is just knows that like they should kind of pull up to this table and give it a try if they haven't
Yeah.
already.
Well, I hope people are inspired to do so. Now, we've had some great comments and questions that I want to get to here. So,
Yeah, go for it.
first one here is our very own Megan, who said, "Perfect way to take control of your career." And you've spoken from the author promotions coordinator here at Draft Digital. Band together and pitch your work. Megan loves that. So,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you
you,
for doing that.
Megan. Thanks for all the stuff you did to make that happen.
So, a question here from Alyssa. Alyssa asks, "Would you say women's fiction's different from women's literature? And can you give examples to help me understand the difference?"
I would say I would, hate to hedge it, but yes and no. I think once
Okay.
you add the word literature into a genre label, I think there's an expectation of potentially some elevated prose, some,
Yeah.
deeper, more reflective, exposition. You're not just potentially there for the plot and the character, but you're there for how the story is told
Right.
and, having a little bit more of a literary bent with the word literature there. So, but I would also say that within women's fiction, there's a place for that. So, yeah, that's why I'm kind of hedging my bets a little bit. But and I think that that's where you have the beauty of women's fiction because you have some really commercial, popcorny stories that are just fun and light, and they have
Right.
closed door intimacy, and but then you also have some deeper, more soulful. We've got this fantastic author in WWA, Erin Bartels. If you haven't read her stories, they will just like knock you over with their beauty, but they're also approachable. Like you can read them really quickly and enjoy them, but they're, the way she writes she's got a little bit of like a haunting bit of it, so
Right.
definitely
Yeah.
check her out if you haven't.
Well, I'm just checking to see, is she on the splash
She
that
isn't.
we?
Most of the
No.
the folks here are indies. So
Okay.
we were trying to
Right.
rah
Oh,
rah
these
our
are the
indie
indie
membership.
authors, and again, this.
I'm running all over waving that indie flag. So
No, but that is cool. This, you do not have to be an independent author. If you are traditionally published, this organization is also for you. So it is very like women's fiction. It's very inclusive.
yeah, and it's great. And I think that's changing. I think that the organization, there's tons of successful indie authors. If Pamela Kelly, I think you've probably been like on panels with her or whatever. And she had a book come out yesterday, y'all, that was traditionally published, but that was a really great example of someone who had great success in the indie space, who
Yeah.
then was able to secure a multi-book traditional deal because they're,
Yeah.
like, hey, I want some of that. They recognize how successful she was.
Authors can have it all, and
Yeah,
you deserve
can't have it all.
it.
Yeah, I
So-
want to be there flipping my hat up in, Times Square or whatever. Only dating myself right now, but
no, no,
whatever.
I know the reference. I get it. You're gonna make it after all. But I want to go back to the term literature only because I studied, have a degree in English language and literature, and when I see the word, I get scared and intimidated. But when I see fiction, I feel like fiction's like, come on in, have a good time, and literature's like, you're gonna have to work at this, Mark. So yes,
Seriously,
exactly.
dude.
Seriously, yep.
You
You're
didn't get
tipping the
that like
glasses.
simile going on that, whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, yeah, and there is room for literature and fun and all the different elements, which I think is part of what makes women's fiction so great and all encompassing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I mean, personally, I used to read a lot of literary fiction, and I think there's a lot within, that is there, read these deeper stories. But right now, I'm just like, my attention span's a little bit less, and I want stories to just claim me and
Yeah,
keep me and
yeah,
make me,
yeah.
sway in the kitchen when I should be like making dinner or folding laundry or whatever. Not to be stereotypical, but I'm very into
Yeah.
cooking and laundry. I'm not gonna lie. So
And that is part of it. Sometimes when I read, you just want to enjoy the story just before bedtime, read for 15 or 20 minutes or whatever. And sometimes when I'm reading a novel that's, a good written novel is great. I'm in it and I'm enjoying it. But then sometimes there's a really exceptionally well written prose that I want to go back and reread and enjoy again. It's like sipping a fine wine. You're like, "Ooh, I want that again." So you go back and reread it, and you realize you read the same page 6 times because you're like, "No, I just wanted to enjoy it. I didn't
yes.
in a different way." So
No, I
that's cool.
totally hear you. And I feel like as I'm growing as a writer, I'm definitely spending more time settings and places and lingering in moments and exploring those through prose. And it's just I'm really enjoying that because obviously I'm like a word person. I'm a
Yeah.
copywriter by day, I'm a marketer. So while you were off doing really great deep reading, I was figuring out how to sell, fruit by the foot,
Yeah.
but those are words too.
It's true. It's true. All right. Okay, I want to pop up this question from Jim. Jim says, "What advice would you give to newer authors who may be paralyzed by the fear of getting real in quotes in their stories?"
I love that question because, there's, opening the bedroom door in the way I did in Leveling Better is super scary place to be. But in reality, when you are a published author, you are putting your stuff out there. It's a really, really vulnerable place, even if you're not opening a bedroom door and talking about your own personal experiences, just like the themes and the stories that you're telling can be very scary and vulnerable and make you afraid of being judged, but y'all gonna get judged. Like, no matter what book you put out there, you could write a book about dinner forks and you're
Yeah.
gonna get judged.
Oh,
So
not that kind of dinner fork.
yeah, exactly. Oh my god, you didn't include the other dinner fork? Like there's always gonna be somebody out there not happy with the fork you're telling. So
Yeah.
just tell your stories and be really clear about the goals of why you're writing. Like, why are you telling the story? And write them down so that when you have these harder moments, you can go back and remember why you're telling the story and why it was meaningful for you and try the best you can not to be it's like impossible, we're all human, but not to really worry about what you're going to say. There's a great line in the Stephen King book, on writing, which is like, once you, open the door and you set the book out there, it's not yours anymore. So the
Yeah.
more you can kind of internalize that, come up with some goals that you can go back to and remember why you're writing. You always say, "Oh, if I can just sell one book, I'll be so happy." And then like after we sell one book, we're like, "If I could only sell 10,000 books, I'd be so happy." You've got to like be honest with why
Yeah.
you're writing and
Yeah.
hopefully that can guide you through because you're never going to get approval from everybody.
Yeah, for sure. This goes back to a comment Alyssa made earlier. I'm just going to pop up. Says it's important to know your why. That's that why is what can actually get you over the finish line. Perhaps that is actually when you talked about that for the fear you had in releasing that first book. There was a why there for you too, right? You
Yes.
wanted to get that story out to potentially help other people.
Yeah, and I feel like I have a super strong why with my book coming out next year about race and class because I'm, biracial, interfaith marriage. And a lot of times when I read women's fiction, there isn't the representation that I would like to see. And that's something that I'm trying to do in my books to make sure that my books have different, um, backgrounds of people, different religious and faiths and genders and because I don't see that when I open the book. And you want to open the book and
Right.
see yourself. So me taking on a black main character, some people might say I shouldn't because I'm not black. I'm a person of color, but I'm not black and I shouldn't be writing those stories. But then you hear going back to Jim's question of why you're writing and Liz's question. One of my sensitivity readers read the book and she said it was so great to open the book and see myself on the page. So I would really encourage people. If your why is to, have more representation, go there, do it right and sensitively, and work with people from those communities to get those stories on the page. But for me, that's a big part of my why, because I want to make sure that there's a little more representation on in the characters. And there doesn't have to be like a reason for that
Yeah,
character to be in the book. They're just there.
yeah,
I thought Lucy Score did a great job of that in The Things We Never Got Over. I think that's the book, the blue one with the lazies. She had
yeah.
a lot of representation. It was just people in that community kind of doing their thing. There wasn't like a reason for people to be there, but they were there, and I was really happy to see that when I read that story.
I think that's so important. I've talked to a number of people over the last few years where that representation is so critical. I mean, I'm just going to use a personal example from my life. Is my son and I just went to see the Spider Verse, the Miles Morales Spider-Man movie, the animated, the second one in the series, and just recognizing that representation is so important to see a superhero who's not a white guy, for example. And that was a huge thing for the Black Panther as well. So that representation,
And The Little
you're
Mermaid that just came out too.
exactly where little girls can see themselves on the big screen. I mean, that goes back to the original Star Trek.
Right.
Uhura as a
Yeah.
captain of a Starfleet commander,
Yes.
who has this position of power, and talking about all of those important things when you can look and see that person's like me. Because oftentimes when you read fiction, you empathize with the character, and you get to understand it from their point of view. And I think that's something very powerful we don't speak enough about as as fiction writers, as storytellers and official. And I think I paused for a second. I don't know if I went
Yeah.
offline for a
But
bit, but there was a weird blip in the air. But yeah. Are we back? Yes.
your sentiment is
Sorry
well
about that,
taken,
Paulette.
though, of making sure that there is representation of people from different. I mean, that was that. Uhura Kirk kiss was the first interracial kiss broadcast on television. So you can make
Yeah,
you can be make powerful change in whatever story you're telling. As artists, I
yeah.
think that's part of what society looks to us. They look for that in art and music and in paintings to reflect society, but also to forge a path for the society you'd like to see.
I love that. So when you talked about getting sensitivity readers, how did you go about finding a sensitivity reader, and why are they so important?
I think it's critical because I think if you're writing about a topic or a community that you're not familiar with, you don't know what you don't know. And it's not just about getting it wrong, it's also about getting it right in a more meaningful way. So there were parts, I was writing a scene of a woman. It was kind of a little bit like a passive aggressive scene when my character's in the elevator. She's a Black woman, and a white woman was getting out the call, and she just had that little moment hesitation of pause because she saw a Black woman in the elevator and she didn't know how to react. And I wrote that reaction in a way that my sensitivity readers were like, "Oh no, that she'd do that for a Black man. But for a white woman, it would be way more subtle." So I was able to get that insight
Mm,
into that. I was able to understand the significance of hairstyle in a professional setting for Black women. And so just working with them, these are the conversations that we would have in private in a Black family. So it's just to get those insights into the
right.
situation that help you reflect it more accurately on the page, but also to make sure that you're not doing anything that would unduly make someone in that community feel triggered or uncomfortable.
Oh,
I
thank
use
you.
them all the time. I think it's a really important step for authors just to make sure that you're getting it right.
Yeah, it is so important because because again, and I'm reading Paisley Rectal's Appropriate right now for for a master's program, and I'm really enjoying the author states nobody purposely sets out to harm you. Most people aren't purposely setting out to harm when they make a mistake like that, and so being open to getting that feedback and adjusting it in order to make it more natural, more real, and allow more people to be able to see themselves in the characters is probably a great thing. That's just going to make your writing better, and it's going to make the book more accessible to more people.
No, absolutely. And I wish people would use them a little bit more, not just, potentially about race and religion and, things that are big, but also things that are small. I read so many books, unfortunately, within women's fiction where people are really kind of insulting about body size, and there's
Yeah,
other things that you might have people about age or people who are abled or people how you write a character and just assume that the default character description is a white character you know
yes,
um so there's lots of little things. In my last book, What We Never Say, I had a therapy sequence, and I reached out to a sensitivity reader who was a licensed therapist, and I had two of them read it to make sure that I was getting those scenes right, and they also suggested some opportunities that I might have missed otherwise. So it's not just always about like a negative, like finger
yeah.
pointing, you're doing that wrong. It's also about opening you to amazing opportunities that you might not have considered.
I love that. And well, Paulette, thank you for opening us up to amazing opportunities. Thanks for sharing. People can find out more about Paulette Stout at paulettestout.com. You can learn more about Paulette's the organization you're a member of, womensfictionwriters.org. If you are enjoying these, please feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe. Let us know how much you love hearing from fantastic guests like Paulette. Be sure to bookmark dddlive.com. Paulette, again, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Mark.
All right, everyone, take care. We're going to close out with my good colleague Kevin Tumlinson talking a little bit about DDD print.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created DDD Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at draftedigital.com.